To begin with, Peter, what does spiritual awakening mean to you? If you had to define it, how would you define spiritual awakening?
Well, I think the first thing I would note is that it's a rare occurrence, really a very, very rare occurrence. That, for example, when I'm in a teaching environment, running a workshop in Portland, Geneva, Australia, wherever, and I have a small group of people come together with the intention of exploring spiritual awakening, that the bulk of the people in the environment, not in the immediate environment, but the bulk of the people in the city and the suburbs and so on, that it's not relevant to them, that it's not what they're looking for. They're doing something else with their lives. So I think that's the first point I would note, is that to come to the point of exploring awakening, exploring awareness, isn't something that most people do. It's not part of our education system. Something else has to already be there, sort of pre-existing in people's psyche, or they have to make special connections with people in order for it to be of relevance. And then, so what is it that awakens that interest? I think it's the awareness of awareness. It's at some point, suddenly or gradually, people become aware of the phenomenon of awareness, that the world isn't just populated by the things of the world, the phenomena, the work that we do, the relationships that we're in, the music that we like, the films that we enjoy, entertainment and so on, that there is something else going on, that there is something not necessarily unique to human beings, but certainly can be in a fully fledged way in humans, and that's the phenomenon of awareness, that we can be aware of that which we're aware of. And I think when that happens, that is really the marker of the development of spiritual awareness, spiritual awakening for people.
Now, it's interesting that you started by talking about how rare spiritual awakening is. One of the questions that is threaded throughout this series is wondering, is spiritual awakening becoming more common, popular? Is it increasing? Just like at a certain point when a human was able to run a 4-minute mile and be measured running a 4-minute mile, it made it easier for other people to run a 4-minute mile. Is spiritual awakening like that? What do you think?
I don't know. I can see that could be the case from a certain perspective. Look at what you're doing in Sounds True and what you've developed over the decades, and the growth in Sounds True and the pure volume of material that you're producing. That, of course, would indicate that there's a growing interest, and then there are a lot of other events and institutes and so on, some explicitly talking about non-duality in science, non-duality in neurophysiology and so on. But I don't know. Of course, the traditional Tibetan Mahayana teaching is that even when the Dharma is in decline, it's like a shrub, like a plant. You still have flowers blossoming, even when the thing's ultimately dying. It's still new flowers are blossoming. So I don't know in the larger picture. Soon as things, we're looking at things in let's say a 50-year time frame, I just don't feel qualified to comment. Sure, now, in these decades in the West, yes, there is a flowering. There are people who are being trained, well-trained, to deliver awareness teachings, more and more books, more and more people becoming involved, YouTube and so on. So for sure, in these decades it is growing. Whether this is something that translates into something that historically in 100 years, historians can reflect back and say, this was one of the most fundamental things happening in human existence, was the growth of awareness in the 21st century, I do not know. So, yeah, it's wonderful what's happening now, really beautiful. The evolution, the experimentation, the innovation, the adaptation, it's all wonderful. And I appreciate all of the different things that are happening, just the different ways that the way that some of the traditions want to keep their traditions quite intact and others are much more into experimentation. I think it's all good, all relevant, all touches some people. That's good enough for me.
Okay, so let's go back to your definition here of spiritual awakening, this becoming aware of awareness. Do you see that it's possible for that to be a stabilized type of condition for someone? They're always aware of awareness, or do you see it as something that comes and goes, I got it, I lost it, I got it, I lost it?
For most people, and here I'm talking, I think about nearly all of the people that I connect with, all of the people that are my students, it comes and goes. There may be, I think there are a few people for whom it is deeply rooted. But even then, the real test is, the real tests, I think, are pain and death. That's when we really get to know the depth of our presencing of awareness, our capacity to just let go and dissolve whatever is happening within the field of awareness. And, death, we don't know how we're going to handle that until it's happening. We don't know what it will look like anyway. So I don't look on it in that way. What I see is that people can make great progress through application in a 5-year time frame, 10-year time frame, 15-year time frame. There's no question that we can make really good progress in terms of improving the quality of our lives, becoming less reactive, getting less tied up in our preferences, what we like and what we don't like. Now, that's not the same thing as being equanimous all the time with everything. But if we can make, reduce our reactivity by 15%, 20% over 10, 15, 20 years, I think that's a phenomenal achievement, because the energy in our conditioned existence the energy of our preferences, what we like and what we don't like, the energy of attraction and aversion is so strong that it does take work to bring about a state of more equanimity. So I don't look on it as the sort of all or nothing thing. Can I, in this life, arrive at this point where I will no longer suffer? I don't present my teachings in that way. I don't think about it that way myself. I look on my life and I think, wow, Peter, gosh, you've been at it for 45 years now or something, and my gosh, I mean, you've done a good job. And then I look at it the last 10 years and I think, wow, and you're still at it, and good improvements are coming along in terms of just being able to be a free, open space for things to move through. With more equanimity, just flowing, being in the flow. So that's how I see it, and I think that it's sort of prudent to see it that way, because otherwise people hang out for an event that's pretty unlikely to happen. They can invalidate the path if they can't convince themselves that they're going to arrive at a point where they will no longer suffer, no matter what happens in their life. Then they can invalidate a teacher, invalidate a teaching, hence not engaged in something that would be very valuable and profound for them to be engaged with.
When you look back at the 45 years, as you say, that you've been quote-unquote at it, would you say that there are stages of the path that have been unfolding for you? Stages, you could say, of spiritual awakening, and how would you describe that?
I'd say there are stages, and I'm going to answer it in a slightly strange way, perhaps.
Strange is okay with me.
The stages in more in terms of refinement of what I'm doing, refinement of the practice, which is often, the practice of no practice, the practice of letting things be as they are. So the evolution is more in terms of the refinement of the practice and seeing that seeing that things that I thought were necessary weren't necessary. Things that I'd read, that I'd been taught, were central to the path, to making progress on the path, did not seem to be relevant. I could not be doing them, and I would still be evolving. So the evolution seemed to be in terms of a refinement of my personal path, in terms of really feeling what works and what doesn't work, what delivers the goods and what doesn't. It's not so much evolution in terms of a progressive diminution of suffering. That's not how I would see it, because life's more complex than that. You can be involved in a really high-quality practice and doing it pretty consistently, and as a teacher you are, sort of by definition. Every day you're doing something that's integral to the path, be it teaching, writing, coaching, and so on. But then life can come along and suddenly throw some big thing at you. like some big physical thing that, really has you up against the wall with physical pain or loss, some sudden loss of a loved one, or the disintegration of part of your life that requires then, the whole reworking of the story of our existence, which can be painful and takes time. So I think it's because life's unpredictable in that way, in terms of what's coming up on the horizon, that I wouldn't try to track evolution in terms, I think it's too simplistic just to try to track it in terms of, I'm suffering less, so therefore I'm making more progress. I think that all the work we do, there's no doubt that we gain a resource through awareness teachings, awareness practices. There's no doubt that we gain a resource that allows us to better handle whatever would be happening, but it doesn't mean we've suddenly got something that we can just dissolve whatever's there and just feel bliss instead of torment and pain.
Well, you mentioned this refinement process, and I didn't follow exactly what that meant to you when you were saying that there's been this progressive refinement.
Well, I think in my case that I started pretty well when Tibetan Mahayana Buddhist teachings first came to Australia, at least, 1974. And they were presented, and are still often presented, in a very orthodox format. The way that they were formulated actually in the 5th century in northern India, and they're still presented pretty much in that same curriculum, same texts that are studied, same practices that people engage in. And I think what has happened for me was that I saw that a lot of the things that I did, I didn't need to do. That it can be much simpler, much more refined. It's like, now for me it feels like precision surgery, the process.
Tell me what you mean by that, precision surgery. What do you mean?
That it's that the practice is more refined than just sitting down for 20 or 30 minutes a day on a cushion and just doing the same set of practices, a sadhana, and getting into a routine of doing that. It involves, when we're with ourselves, living our lives in a way that we create what I call ongoing completion. That whatever I'm doing, I don't have to think about it after I've finished my engagement with it. That's always what I'm looking for. Never to do more than is necessary and not to do less than is necessary. So whatever I'm doing, when I finished it, I just don't want to think about it. I just want to be ready for the next moment, whatever that is, to be fully present so I can fully engage with it. So that requires, understanding the causes and the conditions, the dynamics between our well-being, our serenity, tranquility, equanimity, and what we're doing in the world minute by minute, even less than that, particularly when we're in conversations with others, sentence by sentence, not in a like paranoid way or, a fearful way about the consequences of what we're doing, but something that just comes through naturally. We know what to do, what to say, what not to say. And so then it opens up our mind. It keeps our mind open into the future. And then when our mind is open, then when we're working, particularly as a teacher, when we're working with people, it's because I work, there's always a very tight interface that I create between what I'm doing and the people that I'm working with my students. It's a tight interface. It's not, I don't deliver a teaching. I listen to what they're saying, and I'm in it's a tightly integrated conversation in which I'm looking to how do I take them on a journey as efficiently as possible into a space where they are no longer suffering, they're no longer presenting with whatever the problem was that they began with. And more than that, if I invite them to reconstruct the problem, like to go back in history, just 1 or 2 minutes, wherever the conversation began, they can't do it. It's impossible. They are in another state of consciousness. So for me, part of the refinement is in realizing that authentic teachings need to be transformational on the spot as they are happening. As they're happening, we are changing the state of consciousness that someone is in so that they can no longer produce the suffering that they're producing when they're in this altered state of consciousness, resting in non-dual awareness. So that's quite different from a teaching, which often I feel there really isn't a transformation in the state of consciousness. People receive a teaching pretty well within an ordinary state of consciousness. And then they think it sounds like good ideas. I hope I can implement them. Yes, I've taken good notes, so I can go back and refer to them. So I think the refinement is in the skill in giving people a first-hand taste of a state of consciousness in which suffering is no longer possible.
Now, Peter, that, of course, sounds exciting to me as a student to be working with a teacher who's going to help me see through whatever I'm presenting as my suffering, as my fixation, to use your language from your book, Radiant Mind, in the moment. But previously, you said something that I could imagine the listener feeling quite disappointed, which is, look, over the course, decade upon decade, it's possible you could do all this work to keep deepening in your awareness of awareness. You could still really suffer more in your 4th decade of practice than in your 3rd decade. That I could imagine being quite disappointing news to somebody.
Yeah, but there are no guarantees. I mean, you've got to be real, and maybe not a decade, but what happens that you're doing well in your practice, and then you receive a diagnosis of cancer or even terminal illness. I mean, then what? What you do know is that your practice is going to make the journey easier, that's for sure. That I can say with absolute certainty. What I can't say is that if you have, even been a serious practitioner of awareness teachings for 15 or 20 years, that you're just going to go through that so smoothly that it's just going to be, like bliss land from, the moment. I can't say that. That would be unrealistic. But certainly the journey will be easier particularly if people are part of a community, a like-minded community. And yeah, that's a little disappointing for me. That's the realism of people. I think it's just a generalization, but I think people in the West often don't necessarily have the right algorithm for how much work they put in to the result that they think they should be getting out of it. They feel that they should be getting a more result, better result, more bliss, less suffering, more happiness for a reasonable amount of work, of effort. But I think people quite often underestimate what's involved.
What would be the right algorithm, Peter?
For me, the right... if you're like a serious practitioner, you adjust your life, you try to live your life so it's clean and wholesome, so that you're living in terms of this notion of ongoing completion, doing what needs to be done, not doing what creates complications in our lives, I feel that if we suffered like 20% less in our lives, we really wouldn't know who we were. 20% is a big amount. I wouldn't know who I was. I would be functioning differently. My public identity would be different. People wouldn't know who I was. So that's and I think it's, as I said, more prudent and wiser to be thinking of it in those terms than to get caught up. As I see people getting caught up, they hear about these critical, significant events that have happened to some people, and I have no doubt that they do, that some people have moved from being in excruciating levels of pain, suffering, paranoia, contraction, to the point that they're close to the brink of suicide. Suicide is really looking better than living, and they can break through and no longer suffer. But if I can just make a side comment here, I also feel that in the West, people don't appreciate how that when people feel they are resting in a state of pure awareness, non-conditioned awareness, equanimity, that it's still a highly conditioned state. People forget that. They forget that it's still a highly conditioned state. Their body is working. They've probably had a good meal in their stomach. The things in their life are generally working. So people don't realize that the quality of the state is conditioned. And that's why I always find it edifying, powerful, humbling to reflect on the sages of old who had no air conditioning, heating, who didn't know whether they were going to have a roof over their head, the following night, who didn't even know if they were going to have a meal, in their stomach, for the next 2 or 3 days, but who lived in total bliss because the depth of their presencing of awareness was so deep. It was embedded in every cell of their body. So their presencing of pure awareness wasn't contingent upon the ambient circumstances of their life and environment. So I find it I find it edifying to reflect on that, because I think many people in the West don't fully appreciate that. And so there's a deception in the picture. People can feel that they've accomplished more than they have, and then when the conditions change, like suddenly something really goes wrong with their body, it's, my God, what's happened now? It doesn't invalidate the teachings. It doesn't invalidate what they've been doing at all. It just shows how deep our conditioning is and the work that's involved in bringing awareness into all of the dimensions of our lives.
I think you're making a really good point, Peter, and one that I haven't really thought about. But as someone who lives in a cold climate and, gets comfortable in my meditation room with the heat up very, very high, and,
Right.
I hear what you're saying.
Mm-hmm.
Now, a couple of times you have mentioned something that I don't think I fully understand that I want to tease out a little bit. You've talked about the practice of ongoing completion, having complete experience. And I'd like to hear more about that, because I have conversations like this or other conversations, and afterwards I think, God, I wish I'd asked this or said that, or that happens all the time. So how do I have a complete experience?
Oh, that's exactly it. You're precisely pointing to the way an incompletion is created, that we reflect, retrospectively we reflect, oh, wow, I wish I'd asked that question. That would have been useful. But so what I'm saying is there's an intimation of that. I feel that as our mind becomes more empty, more clear, we have intimations of what we need to do and what we don't need to do. And so it's just tuning into that, and you're just getting a sense, look, there's something. You've been saying it, you've been bringing up some things, which has been great, not leaving them just hanging. Right, and then letting the interview run through and some interesting things not being discussed. So that's the way to be complete. It's mainly getting a sense of, look, there's something I could say here, but I just don't need to. To be honest, it could well just create a complication or just be a waste of time. So, I don't need to do anything here. I just be open and spacious and let things move through, and whatever comes up will come up next. Or also, conversely, seeing the possibility for a lost opportunity, that there is something that we could say that would touch someone deeply. Something that we could offer them, our love, our deep understanding of where they are, our sympathy, all sorts of things that we don't do for whatever reason, and then subsequently we wish that we had done that. So being ongoingly complete is just keeping up with things as they're moving along. So what I'm looking for, I know it sounds weird, but in our conversation now, what I'm looking for is that as we come to the completion, of this conversation, that it is complete, that I don't have to think about it. That's for me is beautiful. That we're not looking for either, patting ourselves on the back, think, wow, did a really good job with that. That was great. Or, wow, I blew that. I could have done that. I should have done that. Because then we're no longer open to the next moment. And, for me, the objective is to be free and open and clear as much as possible to each moment so that we can receive it fully as it is in its integrity and react to it not from the past but react to it with what's appropriate in the moment.
Okay, Peter, I'm going to ask you one final question and hold the openness to the possibility of completion. So the last question here is, I think that what I understand from our conversation about what is spiritual awakening, that in your view, it's this awareness of awareness, that a person has that moment, they're aware that they're aware, and that it's something that can deepen throughout the course of one's lifetime. And what I'm curious to know is, from your own experience and in your teaching work, if somebody wants to deepen that awareness of awareness, what would you say are the best pointers you can give someone?
Well, life will give us what we need. We don't really have to worry too much about that. All that's really needed is keeping the, let's call it practice at the moment, but keeping the practice alive as life delivers to us what it does. We don't have to go looking for suffering. That will happen, for disappointments. But it's keeping alive. It's not giving up. It's not seeing anything as an insurmountable obstacle. It's great, really wonderful when you reach that point where nothing can be an obstacle. It doesn't matter what happens in your life. You know you're going to work out a way to use it. You're going to work out a way to go around it, to drill your way through it, to see that it's invisible, that you can't find it. It's great. I mean, in building up confidence, just to know that you've reached the point where nothing in your life is going to throw you off track. You're going to maybe have to change direction, change where you think you were going, but nothing is an insurmountable obstacle. And just going back, part of the completion in our conversations is thoroughly enjoying them, really enjoying the opportunity that you give to me and others in sharing our life's work, in sharing what you've been involved in, good part of your life, me a good part of my life, and I really value it and want to acknowledge you and what you're doing and all of the people that you interview for sharing, the absolutely best quality wisdom that they've acquired and that they can offer others. And thank you deeply, Tammy, for creating these opportunities.
Thank you, Peter, and thank you for ending on the note of the heart space, which makes me feel fabulously complete.